Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram @Snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you'd like to receive an email once a week with upcoming sleep stories and other news, subscribe to the Snoozeletter at snoozecast.com. This episode is brought to you by Mud Turtles. Tonight, we'll read the next part to our Magic Cloak series from the book Queen Zixi of Ix, or The Story of the Magic Cloak, a children's book written by L. Frank Baum and published in 1905. If you'd like to listen to this continuing story easily in order, go to snoozecast.com/series. In the last episode, the quarrelsome Roly-Rogues bounced down from the mountaintop above the clouds to take over the peaceful kingdom of Noland. Luckily, King Bud and Princess Fluff were far away at the time, having a picnic. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. The entire city was under the dominion of the Roly-Rogues, who forced the people of Noland to wait upon them and amuse them. And if any hesitated to obey their commands, the creatures would bump against them and pull their hair until they cried for mercy. Aunt Rivette was in her room at the top of the palace when the Roly-Rogues invaded the city of Noland. She remembered she could escape the creatures by flying, so the old woman calmly stepped out of her window upon a little iron balcony, spread her great wings, and flew away before the Roly-Rogues could catch her. Then she soared calmly through the air, and, having remembered that Bud and Fluff had gone to the river on a picnic, she flew swiftly in that direction, and before long came to where the children and old Tally-Tab were eating their lunch, while the dog Ruffles, who was in good spirits, sang a comic song to amuse them. They were much surprised to see Aunt Rivette flying toward them, but when she alighted and told Bud that his kingdom had been conquered by the Roly-Rogues and all his people enslaved, the little party was so astonished that they stared at one another in speechless amazement. "Oh, Bud, what shall we do?" finally asked Fluff, in distress. "Don't know," said Bud, struggling to swallow a large piece of sandwich that in his excitement had stuck fast in his throat. "One thing is certain," remarked Aunt Rivette, helping herself to a slice of cake. "Our happy lives are now ruined forever. We should be foolish to remain here, and the sooner we escape to some other country where the Roly-Rogues cannot find us, the safer we shall be." "But why run away?" asked Bud. "Can't something else be done? Here, Tally-Dab, you're one of my counselors. What do you say about this affair?" Now, the Lord High Steward was a deliberate old fellow, and before he replied, he dusted the crumbs from his lap, filled and lighted his long pipe, and smoked several whiffs in a thoughtful manner. "It strikes me," said he at last, "that by means of the Princess Fluff's magic cloak, we can either destroy or scatter these rascally invaders and restore the kingdom to peace and prosperity." "Sure enough," replied Bud. "Why didn't we think of that before?" "You will have to make the wish, Bud," said Fluff, "for all the rest of us have wished, and you have not made yours yet." "All right," answered the king. "If I must, I must. But I'm sorry I have to do it now, for I was saving my wish for something else." "But where's the cloak?" asked the dog, rudely breaking into the conversation. "You can't wish without the cloak." "The cloak is locked up in a drawer in my room at the palace," said Fluff. "And our enemies have possession of the palace," continued Tally-Dab, gloomily. "Was there ever such ill luck?" "Never mind," said Aunt Rivette. "I'll fly back and get it. That is, if the Roly-Rogues haven't already broken open the drawer and discovered the cloak." "Please go at once, then," exclaimed Fluff. "Here's the key." And she unfastened it from the chain at her neck and handed it to her aunt. "But be careful, whatever you do, that those horrible creatures do not catch you." "I'm not afraid," said Aunt Rivette confidently. And, taking the key, the old lady at once flew away in the direction of the city of Noland, promising to return very soon. Chapter 14. The Bravery of Aunt Rivette. The Roly-Rogues were so busy rioting that they did not look into the air and discover Aunt Rivette flying over the city. So she alighted, all unobserved, upon a balcony of the palace, just outside the chamber of the Princess Fluff, and succeeded in entering the room. The creatures had ransacked this apartment, as they had every other part of the royal palace, and Fluff's pretty dresses and ornaments were strewn about in dreadful confusion. But the drawer in which rested the magic cloak was still locked, and in a few moments the old woman had the precious garment in her hands. It was, as we know, the imitation cloak Queen Zixi had made and exchanged for the real one, but so closely did it resemble the fairy cloak that Aunt Rivette had no idea she was carrying a useless garment back to her little niece and nephew. On the contrary, she thought to herself, "Now we can quickly dispose of these monstrous rogues and drive them back to their own country." Hearing someone moving about in the next room, she ran to the window and soon was flying away with the cloak to the place where she had left Bud and Fluff. "Good," cried the Lord High Steward when he saw the cloak. "Now we have nothing more to fear. Put on your cloak, your Majesty, and make the wish." Bud threw the cloak over his shoulders. "What shall I wish?" he asked. "Let me see," answered Tally-Dab. "What we want is to get rid of these invaders. Wish them all to the kingdom of Ix." "Oh no," cried Fluff. "It would be wicked to injure Queen Zixi and her people. Let us wish the Roly-Rogues back where they came from." "That would be folly," said the dog Ruffles, with an accent of scorn. for they could easily return again to our city of Knoll, having once learned the way here." "That is true," agreed Aunt Rivette. "The safest thing to do is to wish them all dead." "But it would be an awful job to bury so many great balls," objected Bud. "It would keep all our people busy for a month at least." "Why not wish them dead and buried?" asked Ruffles. "Then they would be out of the way for good and all." "A capital idea," responded Tallydab. "But I haven't seen these curious creatures yet," said Bud. "And if I now wish them all dead and buried, I shall never get a glimpse of one of them. So let's walk boldly into the city, and when they appear to interfere with us, I'll make the wish, and the Roly-Rogues will instantly disappear." So the entire party returned to the city of Knoll. Bud and Fluff riding their ponies, Aunt Rivette fluttering along beside them, and the Lord High Steward walking behind with his dog. The Roly-Rogues were so much surprised to see this little party boldly entering the streets of the city and showing no particle of fear of them that they at first made no offer to bother them. Even when Bud roared with laughter at their strange appearance and called them mud turtles and footballs, they did not resent the insults, for they had never heard of either a turtle or a football before. When the party had reached the palace and the children had dismounted, Bud laughed yet louder, for the gigantic General Tollydob came to the kitchen door, wearing an apron while he polished a big dishpan, the Roly-Rogues having made him a maid. The ruler of the Roly-Rogues was suffering from a toothache, so he had rolled himself into a ball and made old Tollydob, the Lord High Counselor, rock him gently as he lay upon his back, just as one would rock a baby's cradle. Jicky was scratching the back of another Roly-Rogue with a sharp garden rake, while Jicky's 6 servants stood in a solemn row at his back. They would do anything for Jicky, but they would not lift a finger to serve anyone else. So the old man had to do the scratching unaided. These 6 young men had proved a great puzzle to the Roly-Rogues, for they found it impossible to touch them or injure them in any way. So, after several vain attempts to conquer them, they decided to leave Jicky's servants alone. The Lord High Purse-Bearer was waving a fan to keep the flies off 2 of the slumbering monsters, and the Lord High Executioner was feeding another Roly-Rogue with soup from a great ladle, the creature finding much amusement in being fed in this manner. King Bud, feeling sure of making all his enemies disappear with a wish, found rare sport in watching his periwigged counselors thus serving their captors. So he laughed and made fun of them until the Roly-Rogue ruler stuck his head out and commanded the boy to run away. "Why, you ugly rascal, I'm the King of Noland," replied Bud, "so you'd better show me proper respect." With that, he picked up a good-sized pebble and threw it at the ruler. It struck him just over his aching tooth, and with a roar of anger, the Roly-Rogue bounded toward Bud and his party. The assault was so sudden that they had much ado to scramble out of the way, and as soon as Bud could escape the rush of the huge ball, he turned squarely around and shouted, "I wish every one of the Roly-Rogues dead and buried." Hearing this, and seeing that the king wore the magic cloak, all the high counselors at once raised a joyful shout, and Fluff and Bud gazed upon the Roly-Rogues expectantly, thinking that, of course, they would disappear. But Zixi's cloak had no magic powers whatever, and now dozens of the Roly-Rogues, aroused to anger, bounded toward Bud's little party. I am sure the result would have been terrible had not Aunt Rivette suddenly come to the children's rescue. She threw one lean arm around Bud and the other around Fluff, and then, quickly fluttering her wings, she flew with them to the roof of the palace, which they reached in safety. The Lord High Steward and his dog went down before the rush, and the next moment old Tallytab was crying loudly for mercy, while Ruffles limped away to a safe spot beneath a bench under an apple tree, howling and shouting angry epithets at the Roly-Rogues. "I wonder what's the matter with the cloak," gasped Bud. "The old thing's a fraud. It didn't work." "Something went wrong, that's certain," replied Fluff. "You're sure you hadn't wished before, aren't you?" "Yes, I'm sure," said Bud. "Perhaps," said Aunt Rivette, "the fairies have no power over these horrible creatures." "That must be it, of course," said the princess. "But what shall we do now? Our country is entirely conquered by these monsters, so it isn't a safe place for us to stay in." "I believe I can carry you anywhere you'd like to go," said Aunt Rivette. "You're not so very heavy." "Suppose we go to Queen Zixi and ask her to protect us," the princess suggested. "That's all right, if she doesn't bear us a grudge. You know we knocked out her whole army," remarked Bud. "Quavo, the minstrel, says she is very beautiful and kind to her people," said the girl. "Well, there's no one else we can trust," Bud answered gloomily, "so we may as well try Zixi. But if you drop either of us on the way, Aunt Rivette, I'll have to call in the Lord High Executioner." "Never fear," replied the old woman. "If I drop you, you'll never know what has happened. So each one of you put an arm around my neck and cling tight, and I'll soon carry you over the mountain and the river into the kingdom of Ix." Chapter 20. In the Palace of the Witch Queen. Bud and Fluff were surprised at the magnificence of the city of Ix. The Witch Queen had reigned there so many centuries that she found plenty of time to carry out her ideas, and the gardens, shrubbery, and buildings were beautifully planned and cared for. The splendid palace of the Queen was in the center of a delightful park, with white marble walks leading up to the front door. Aunt Rivette landed the children at the entrance to this royal park, and they walked slowly toward the palace, admiring the gleaming white statues, the fountains and flowers as they went. It was beginning to grow dusk, and the lights were gleaming in the palace window when they reached it. Dozens of liveried servants were standing near the entrance, and some of these escorted the strangers with much courtesy to a reception room. There, a gray-haired master of ceremonies met them and asked in what way he might serve them. This politeness almost took Bud's breath away, for he had considered Queen Zixi in the light of an enemy rather than a friend. But he decided not to sail under false colors, so he drew himself up in royal fashion and answered, "I am King Bud of Noland, and this is my sister, Princess Fluff, and my Aunt Rivette. My kingdom has been conquered by a horde of monsters, and I have come to the Queen of Ix to ask her assistance." The master of ceremonies bowed low and said, "I'm sure Queen Zixi will be glad to assist your majesty. Permit me to escort you to rooms that you may prepare for an interview with her as soon as she can receive you." So, they were led to luxurious chambers and were supplied with perfumed baths and clean clothes, which proved very refreshing after their tedious journey through the air. It was now evening, and when they were ushered into the Queen's reception room, the palace was brilliantly lighted. Zixi, since her great disappointment in the lilac grove, had decided that her longing to behold a beautiful reflection in her mirror was both impossible and foolish. So, she had driven the desire from her heart and devoted herself to ruling her kingdom wisely. As she had ruled before the idea of stealing the magic cloak had taken possession of her. And when her mind was in normal condition, the Witch Queen was very sweet and agreeable in disposition. So, Queen Zixi greeted Bud and his sister and aunt with great kindness, kissing Fluff affectionately upon her cheek and giving her own hand to Bud to kiss. It is not strange that the children considered her the most beautiful person they had ever beheld, and to them she was as gentle as beautiful, listening with much interest to their tale of the invasion of the Roly-Rogues, and promising to assist them by every means in her power. This made Bud somewhat ashamed of his past enmity, so he said bluntly, "I am sorry we defeated your army and made them run." "Why, that was the only thing you could do when I had invaded your dominion," answered Zixi. "I admit that you were in the right and that I deserved my defeat. But why did you try to conquer us?" asked Fluff. "Because I wanted to secure the magic cloak, of which I had heard so much," returned the Queen, frankly. "Oh," said the girl. "But of course, you understand that if I had known the magic cloak could grant no more wishes, I would not have been so eager to secure it," continued Zixi. "No," said Bud, "the old thing won't work any more. and we nearly got captured by the Roly-Rogues before we found it out." "Oh, you have the cloak again?" asked Zixi, with a look of astonishment. "Yes, indeed," returned the princess. "It was locked up in my drawer, and Aunt Trevette managed to get it for me before the Roly-Rogues could find it." "Locked in your drawer," repeated the Witch Queen, musingly. "Then I am sorry to say you have not the fairy cloak at all, but the imitation one." "What do you mean?" asked Fluff, greatly surprised. "Why, I must make a confession," said Zixi, with a laugh. "I tried many ways to steal your magic cloak. First, I came to Noel as Miss Trust. Do you remember?" "Oh, yes," cried Fluff, "and I mistrusted you from the first. And then I sent my army to capture the cloak. But when both of those plans failed, I disguised myself as the girl Adlena." "Adlena?" exclaimed the princess. "Why, I've often wondered what became of my maid Adlena, and why she left me so suddenly and mysteriously." "Well, she exchanged an imitation cloak for the one the fairies had given you," said Zixi, with a smile. "And then she ran away with the precious garment, leaving in your drawer a cloak that resembled the magic garment, but had no magical charms." "How dreadful," said Fluff. "But it did me no good," went on the Queen, sadly, "for when I made a wish, the cloak could not grant it." "Because it was stolen," cried the girl, eagerly. "The fairy who gave it to me said that if the cloak was stolen, it would never grant a wish to the thief." "Oh," said Zixi, astonished. "I did not know that." "Of course not," replied Fluff, with a rather triumphant smile. "But if you had only come to me and told me frankly that you wanted to use the cloak, I would gladly have lent it to you, and then you could have had your wish." "Well, well," said Zixi, much provoked with herself. "To think I have been so wicked, all for nothing, when I might have succeeded without the least trouble had I frankly asked for what I wanted. But see here," said Bud, beginning to understand the tangle of events. "I must have worn the imitation cloak when I made my wish, and that was the reason that my wish didn't come true." "To be sure," rejoined Fluff, "and so it is nothing but the imitation cloak we have brought here." "No wonder it would not destroy and bury the Roly-Rogues," declared the boy, sulkily. "But if this is the imitation, where, then, is the real magic cloak?" "Why, I believe I left it in the lilac grove," replied Zixi. "Then we must find it at once," said Bud, "for only by its aid can we get rid of those Roly-Rogues. And afterwards I will gladly lend it to you also. I promise now to lend it to you," said Fluff, turning to the Queen. "And your wish will be fulfilled, after all, whatever it may be." This expression of kindness and goodwill brought great joy to Zixi, and she seized the generous child in her arms and kissed her with real gratitude. We will start for the lilac grove tomorrow morning, she exclaimed delightedly. And before night, both King Bud and I will have our wishes fulfilled. Then the Witch Queen led them to her royal banquet hall, where a most delightful dinner was served. And all the courtiers and officers of Zixi bowed low, first before the King of Noland, and then before his sweet little sister, and promised them the friendship of the entire kingdom of Ix.